Yeah, something that's kind of I've been thinking a lot about recently is DAOs. You mentioned it there, like it's this opportunity to like, sort of like accumulate some capital and resources and like deploy it, and that's what people are doing. And I think that's true, but I think I feel it changing as more and more people get involved, right? As these things become sort of like super massive. And I'm wondering, and this is a really early thought, so like maybe I'm totally missing the mark here, but it feels like DAOs are starting to become how people identify and kind of like maybe even lifestyles. If that is crazy, like if you look around, like last year, DeFi summer were yield farming, right? And then if somebody threw an Ethereum conference, like we would be there. And you fast forward to today, and like our host here has a Doodle, but Doodles is putting on parties at Art Basel with Bored Apes and Cool Cats, and like now, I'm following on Twitter. People are like, "Oh, let's go take over South by Southwest," right? Suddenly, it feels like you're. So I used to be a photographer, a fashion photographer for many years, and being a photographer, I used to always say, was not a job. It was a lifestyle. It was like how you identified. What do you do? I'm a photographer. Who are you? I'm a photographer. You identified, like that sort of job was actually how that was your identity, right? In a way that like, what's your job? Oh, I'm an administrative assistant. Like, who are you? It's like I'm this person. I go rafting. I do all this stuff. But in fashion, you are that thing. That's your identity. What I sort of feel like maybe is happening is DAOs are, and maybe crypto in general. I don't know. It's early, but I see your membership in your DAO starts to become your identity, right? Where you have these people who are identifying themselves in the virtual space, certainly as their avatar, right? I'm a punk. People have their different avatars, but maybe they're also going to become lifestyles. I was in a conversation, a sort of working group earlier this week, and Kraus House was there, and they're a DAO, a social DAO, a social token DAO. I'm not sure exactly the proper definition of those, around buying an NBA team. Like their goal is to buy an NBA team, but they were talking about how they need to build all this DAO tooling, and there's all these products, and people in the community have these ideas about what they're going to build, and it's just like, oh, but I thought you were buying an NBA team. They're like, well, yes, but we have to do this and we have to do that. I'm in another DAO, Dope Wars. I started that, but I sort of like put this tweet out, and it's blown up into this huge community. And people are doing all sorts of different things, right? Like some are artists, they're making like a hip hop album. Some people are like cutting edge, like layer 2 mathematicians. And in NFT NYC, there was one member who I'd never met before who was in the Dope Wars DAO who showed up and met me and gave me a Dope Wars sweater, right? And I quote unquote created Dope Wars, but someone comes up to me and goes, "Hey, this is for you. It's a Dope Wars sweater," and it starts to dawn on me that these communities, they start as crypto, and like maybe they're pooling their capital technically, and maybe they're like technically pooling resource to like acquire and do things, but maybe they're actually becoming ways of life for people, like how they identify. And that's just wild. Like that, I think we are not prepared for at all. So yeah, that's kind of like a half-baked feeling, but it's, when I see these parties in every kind of event, and I see Cabin DAO doing retreats, you start to think the people in Cabin DAO, are they there because they really believe passionately about pooling capital to buy cabins and do some new form of Airbnb and make a profit? Or are they really there because they love this idea of building these communities based around being out there somewhere in the wilderness so you can like think and commune with other humans? Like suddenly it's like, wait a minute, maybe this isn't the 2017 DAO where we're like gonna make more money, bros, but maybe it's like the 2022 DAO where it's just like, I'm quitting my job because I'm identifying as this community and this mission. So
yeah,
I'm throwing that out there.
Yeah, a couple of responses to that. So one, FWB feels instructive here, right? Like, kind of
Totally.
What one of the better examples of like kind of pure lifestyle DAO, where it is like explicitly social, cultural, in terms of its mission, and then the branding is all kind of like culture aligned with some type of city based groups of people. I actually think your example of dope wars is interesting too. I remember seeing your tweet, and I think it came out. It was right after Luke came out, right? It was like the day after,
right?
And what you said in the tweet was like, listen, like, I don't remember the exact wording, but you're like, I didn't really grow up with all this kind of like wizard shit. That doesn't really resonate with me. Yeah. Like, I wasn't into Lord of the Rings. I wasn't into whatever Harry Potter or like anything kind of like within that canon. I was, the thing I remember from when I was a kid was things like drug wars on your TI-89 and the culture around that, which had like, cars and guns and drugs and kind of like this, but almost like a mean streets, style aesthetic, which does have a whole culture around it, right? Anything from Scorsese movies to hip hop culture and so on. It is interesting. Towards the example that you're giving, which is like, well, people kind of culturally identifying with another group of people. And that being around kind of a more personal alignment. And I actually think the dope wars in the tweet that you sent is really instructive towards that. It's like, listen, here's, loot is interesting because you've got all these like incredible mechanics plus some technical mechanics around like what's happening on chain with the NFTs themselves and the way that those NFTs become composable into broader things that the community can develop around like games or deconstruction of the NFTs to rebundle new NFTs like Genesis Adventures and so on. There's a ton of cool mechanics, but if the content of those mechanics like do not resonate with you, then fork it and imbue it with content that like kind of does matter to you or to another group of people. And the other thing I would lift off of that you said earlier was you were mentioning like religious groups, potentially as like maybe those are proto DAOs, right? Essentially, think about like collector DAOs or squiggle DAO. The squiggle is the symbol of the DAO and kind of unifying aspect of whatever culture they're establishing within that org, within that project. And you could say the same of religions. Like every religion has like, or almost every religion has some type of like symbol attached to it. The crucifix is the NFT that is like fractionally shared between all these Christians, and that's what kind of unites them together in terms of like values, shared culture, and so on, that they can kind of like build within this community. And that obviously, especially in the kind of case of Christianity, like cuts both ways in terms of how positive or negative can be, but it is kind of seems to be like a very like human dynamic that is maybe increasingly being expressed on chain.
There's been a handful of forks of that DAO.
More than a handful, right?
Yeah, I agree with you completely that DAOs are, I totally agree that DAOs are becoming a lifestyle. It's definitely a thing where I think people complain about OpenSea because it's a company, and obviously they don't like the fees, et cetera, and they want to see a token because they want to speculate on that token, undoubtedly. But I think some people, I suspect in the long term it will end up being a minority of people, because it seems like a lot of people who get into NFTs who don't get so much into the decentralization vibe or the crypto part of what NFTs are about, don't really care about decentralization that much. And so I suspect that audience, if that audience grows faster than awareness and caring about decentralization, which would not surprise me given how little people cared about encryption with messaging or privacy with social media, and still essentially don't care about the centralization of their data for the most part with these ridiculous arguments like, I have nothing to hide. I suspect that there could be a lot of people who do just like the lifestyle piece of it without even understanding the depths of why you might want something to be run in a decentralized way. But my actual centralized way